Whenever you're ready. House Bill 587.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm State Representative Bill Owen of the 131st Legislative District, and I'm pleased to be here to present to you House Bill 587. This is the third year I have sponsored 587. It started out 2 years ago as primarily being an effort for the city of Springfield. We are in the process of forming an entity to address our housing stock in Springfield, and as we went through the process, looking at a multi-pronged effort, how could we best address it? One issue came up was properties that were taken back by the city. We were asking city staff, how did you determine who got these properties? And we just got this blind look of, well, we're not really trained to determine who to sell it to. We just give a price, and whoever has certified funds gets it. And so the obvious question was, how do we know we're not trading one deadbeat owner for another deadbeat owner? And so that's when we decided we needed a mechanism as we transition these properties from dilapidation over into repurpose, an entity in which to perform that by people that know what they're doing. And so that's when we decided to look at the land bank. During the course of the first year, I had numerous cities and colleagues that reached out to me wanting on it. So in year two, we opened it up more statewide. When we failed to pass it last year, we spent the interim this past year really digging into, like, the St. Louis City Land Bank, the challenges they had, what can we do better? And so we've really taken on a new look. And so if you've heard this before, we've got some new additions that I want to make sure that the committee's aware of. The first thing is that we heard a lot about, before I get into that, let me just say a whole nother piece of this has been bringing the idea of Chapter 141 judicial foreclosure to this bill. And what we found out as we were looking at the city of St. Louis is that a lot of the properties they're sitting on, nobody wants them because of all the liens and encumbrances that are involved with those properties. And so by bringing Chapter 141 in, it can allow any county collector on a case-by-case basis, at the discretion of the county collector, to be able to determine what properties they want to take through a traditional tax sale and which ones they want to take through judicial foreclosure. As you're probably aware, in a traditional tax sale, all you're doing is someone's paying off the taxes to acquire the property, but any liens, encumbrances, or other clouds on the title, they remain. And so, therefore, this is a way to clean these properties up so that they are sellable, they're bankable, they're good, they're in a condition where somebody can do something with them. So one of the really big changes, and I think particularly for our outstate communities and outstate counties, this is probably more the avenue to go than to create a land bank. So we've probably even reduced the number of land banks in the state by including this Chapter 141 in the bill. But some of the other things that we've done to try and improve the bill is we looked at some issues as far as board members and other people around the St. Louis Land Bank being involved in transactions. We have language in this bill saying that if you create a land bank, that no board member can be involved in any of the transactions, and we actually even go out 2 degrees of consanguinity to even keep family members from participating. We also wanted to look at, the issue that some people said that the St. Louis City Land Bank was sitting on these properties too long. We have in this bill now a measure that puts a time limit on how long the land bank can hold the property. and that when they reach a certain point, they're forced to have to sell. Even when the land bank sells to an investor or a potential homeowner, they have a time frame in which they have to, which is 3 years. So you've got 5 years for the land bank, 3 years for the individual that purchases the land. So the land bank can't sit on these properties, and particularly investors, because they have acknowledged they have a problem. They've sold parcels to investors, and then the investors have just been sitting on the property. This will hopefully help eliminating that. The final thing that I will mention is we last year left St. Louis County out of this bill by purpose, and that being because there's 88 municipalities, and how are they all going to interact? Over the course of the interim, since last legislative session, those communities have met with the county. They've come up with language as to how they want to operate, which will be with under a county umbrella. We won't have 88 municipal land banks in St. Louis County. They've met. We've got it in the bill on how they're going to function, and I think with the improvements that we've made, we've just really taken this measure to another level. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I will stop and answer any questions that the committee, you or the committee, may have.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the Representative, Senator Moon?
Good morning, Representative Owen.
Representative Moon, or Senator Moon, I'm sorry.
That's fine.
Well, it used to be Representative.
Mike works just as well.
Yeah.
Thank you. My interest was piqued in this bill when I noticed that it was only for Springfield. Did I hear that correctly?
It's when it first started out, the first year it was just Springfield.
Okay.
And then in year 2, we took it statewide, and now year 3, then we put these other components on here for like conflict of interest, not able to sitting on parcels and these other, and then the big thing, which is the judicial foreclosure piece on tax sales.
Looking back through here on the language there, and it looks like, and I'm not certain of all the designations, but it sounds like it's still Springfield. Yeah.
Well, Springfield is included, but
Yeah.
it's all but 2 counties, which is Buchanan County and Jackson County, were kept out, and the reason being because they already have land banks in their major city right now, and I didn't want a conflict, kind of like what I did with St. Louis County, where they were excluded last year. I wanted the local entities to get together and say, okay, here's how we would operate if there's more than one land bank. And so the only parts of the state that have been excluded have been Buchanan County and Jackson County.
Okay. I may want to talk to you a little bit more about this and get into a deep discussion now, but thanks for the inquiry. Thank you,
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions? All right. First witness to testify in favor of the bill, whenever you're ready.
Good morning, members of the committee. I'm Dale Sweet. I'm an attorney in private practice in the St. Louis area, and I tend to represent investors and rehabbers, most of whom have family businesses, in rehabbing houses and buying dilapidated and abandoned property, mostly in the St. Louis area and in its surrounding counties. And what we find with these investors and rehabbers is that they're buying property that's subject to very questionable title that makes it difficult for them to sell their property and difficult to finance their construction projects. House Bill 587, which I'm speaking in favor of, would allow at the entirely optional. It doesn't necessarily make anyone do anything, but at the option of a local government, such as a county, could choose to run certain properties through a judicial foreclosure system, as Representative Owen indicated, resulting in better title. There would be no shortcut to a land bank or a government agency, but rather a public auction conducted by the sheriff of the county before anything would go to a land bank, and then only if someone didn't bid on it. My clients would be more likely to participate in this type of auction on a judicial foreclosure because the quality of title flowing from that sheriff's deed would allow them greater flexibility in renovating, borrowing, and selling property. Right now in St. Louis County alone, we have a couple thousand properties on what's called a post-third list. The county collector has tried to sell those properties at least 3 years in a row at public auction, and no one bought them. And at this time, the tax bill exceeds the value of the building and the lot. So for instance, in unincorporated North St. Louis County, we have residences that are vacant, code non-compliant, dilapidated, weeds, snakes, rodents, the whole thing. The sticker price to buy that property from the county collector of revenue is $30,000, but it's maybe worth $20,000. So this would allow, at the option of the county, for the government to run some, but not all, of those properties through a judicial foreclosure system, subject them to public bidding at a public auction. If they are not purchased at the public auction, would allow them to reset the taxes and sell them for closer to market value. There are other speakers here this morning who can answer questions probably better than I can, especially about funding and that sort of thing, but I'm here for your questions also, members of the committee.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the witness? All right, seeing none,
Thank you, Senator.
Next witness to speak in favor of the bill, please come forward.
Morning, members of the committee. My name is Peter Hoffman. I'm an attorney with Legal Services of Eastern Missouri. For the last 12 years, the entirety of my legal practice has been focused on helping neighborhoods return vacant and abandoned property to market. I am here in support of House Bill 587. As Representative Owen and Mr. Sweet alluded to, HB 587 represents a land bank that's much different than the other land banks that have come before it. At the heart of this bill is the ability for counties to use a court-supervised tax sale system, the system that is currently used with some success in Jackson County. This is the best way under Missouri law to clear land titles to promote redevelopment of vacant and abandoned property and encourage the private market to purchase and redevelop those homes. This bill also represents a departure from past land bank legislation in that it's much more targeted. Rather than bringing all undesirable tax sale properties into the land bank inventory, which is done in St. Louis City and in Kansas City, HB 587 allows counties to selectively foreclose the tax delinquent properties best suited for private redevelopment, avoiding the bloated inventory problem that currently plagues the land bank of St. Louis City. Lastly, HB 587 provides incentives for land bank agencies to quickly reintroduce properties to the market, ensuring that the land bank agency will not speculate on property when there's a private market interest to protect. For all of the foregoing reasons, I humbly request that this committee support HB 587. I am also available for questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the witness? You know, kind of going back to the previous witness's comments, there's an interesting piece Vice News has about St. Louis and the vacant properties and how many schools, high schools and things like that are now shut down. And, you know, that city was intended to be 1 million in population, which is now 300,000. So there are a lot of vacant buildings for really cheap. And but you should watch it. It's a pretty interesting piece and what, you know, when it's done. But this goes right along with what you guys are trying to accomplish, I think. So thank you. Any other witnesses testify in favor of the bill? Is there anybody against this? You can leave now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, for the record, my name is Jason Zamkis. I'm a registered lobbyist on behalf of the Missouri Association of Realtors. We believe that this could provide a valuable tool to communities throughout the state to address tax delinquent and abandoned properties and return them to productive use. And for that reason, we'd like to go on record in support. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the witness? All right, seeing none, next witness testify in favor of the bill.
Sorry. Mr. Chairman, committee members, my name is Pat Kelly. I'm the Executive Director of Municipal League of Metro St. Louis. I want to go on record in support of House Bill 587. First, I want to thank Representative Owens for allowing us to be part of this process over the last year and a half. We, as a league, represent 84 of the municipalities in St. Louis County. We do not want each individual municipality to have their land bank. The legislation specifically sets up a process in St. Louis County where there will be just one land bank. I can tell you that this is a real problem in St. Louis County. As mentioned before, when St. Louis County goes to sell properties, after a couple of tries, if they're not successful with that, what has historically happened is they actually turn these properties over to the municipalities for the cost of recording those deeds. So we have municipalities in St. Louis County, specifically smaller ones in North County, that control in excess of 100 parcels of abandoned property, which for these cities, it's just hard to even maintain cutting the grass, much less have a process for getting these properties back on the tax roll. So it becomes a burden to the community, it becomes a cost to the cities, and they don't have the professional staff or the ability to get these properties back on the tax roll. So we hope that you will support this bill. I will say one other thing about this, it might not be the perfect process. You'll hear people saying that we shouldn't do this, but it's a lot easier to do nothing than to try to move forward and come up with a process for getting rid of these properties. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Any questions for the witness? All right, seeing none, thank you. Next witness testifying in favor of the bill.
Mr. Chairman, David Winton here on behalf of the St. Louis Economic Development Partnership as well as St. Louis County. I want to go on record and support the legislation. Thank the committee for its time.
All right, thank you. Any questions for the witness? Seeing none, next witness testifying in favor.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Richard Sheets. I'm the Executive Director of the Missouri Municipal League, and we want to go on record to support Senate Bill 587. It really goes a long way to help the housing stock throughout Missouri. Small and large cities throughout the state have a problem with adequate housing and also abandoned buildings that we just can't get back into the system and let people live in those buildings and use those buildings. And House Bill 587 really goes a long way to help those communities bring those housing stock back to good use. I'll try to answer any questions if I can.
Any questions for the witness? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Next witness to testify in favor of.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Will Mars on behalf of the City of Springfield. Just want to go on record and support, thank the bill sponsor for bringing this forward. And to answer Senator Moon's question, this did begin as a Springfield-specific bill, but we saw this as a valuable economic tool throughout the state, and we were happy to help all cities who'd like to participate.
Thank you. And, any questions for witness? Seeing none, next witness to testify in favor of.
Chairman, Casey Nail, representing Empower Missouri. Just want to go on record in support and thank the sponsor for bringing it forward.
All right, thank you. Any questions for this witness? All right, seeing none, or is there any other witnesses testifying in favor of the bill? All right, any witnesses to testify in opposition? Whenever you're ready.
I have copies of my testimony for everybody. My name is David Stokes. I'm Director of Municipal Policy at the Show Me Institute, Missouri's free market think tank, here in ardent opposition to this legislation. I'll note that nobody mentioned in the prior testimony that there are former members of the St. Louis City Board of Aldermen sitting in prison right now for bribery charges, some of which related to the St. Louis Land Bank. While I won't use the word corruption for the Kansas City Land Bank, the Kansas City Star has, in late 2021, did a very detailed investigation of the Kansas City Land Bank and certainly documented instances of favoritism and corruption in that land bank. I was at the Show Me Institute about 10, 12 years ago when Kansas City instituted their land bank, and we had a colleague of mine at the time, Audrey Spalding. She did a lot of work on this, the failures of the St. Louis Land Bank. And I was with her at these meetings when people said, well, with the Kansas City Land Bank, we're going to fix it. We're going to do it better than St. Louis did. We're going to fix all the errors. Well, as the investigation by the Kansas City Star showed about a year and a half ago, They didn't do that. So to hear people saying, well, St. Louis, we're going to make it even better, fool me once, I guess, but I don't see any reason for all the talks about clearer title and things like that. You can do that by adjusting the law ruling the existing county land trusts. I have no problem with trying to get clearer title on things being held that haven't been sold, that are the post-third sale. You can change the laws for the existing land trusts that everybody has. But we've seen in St. Louis and we've seen in Kansas City a continual pattern for years now where they just reject offers under the guise of holding it for future development. It's like another subsidy for the developer industry. And so here I'm going to read a little bit from my testimony to make sure I get my numbers just right. As the Star documented in 2021, at a July meeting, the Kansas City Board rejected 31 of the 33 purchase officers without explanation. We'd seen the same process, and this was one where people wanted to buy the property. I'd say lecturing the board, Bryant said it was wrongheaded to reject the offer when no one else had been interested in buying the lots since they became part of the land bank portfolio 4 years ago. That's exactly the same thing we've seen in St. Louis. Show Me Institute research found that, and our research was from a prior decade, but at least 550 examples of St. Louis rejecting multiple offers for the same property, all under the guise of we're saving it for future development. But what happens in the end is these properties, they reject the neighborhood person who wants to buy it to maybe have a bigger yard or build an addition on the house under the guise of let's save it for some big future development, which never happens. And then the property is off the tax rolls for decades owned by these cities here. So these are continual properties. And to know that people are in jail for St. Louis for corruption, to know that there's been significant interest of cronyism and favoritism in Kansas City, and then to look around and say, hey, let's bring this to the rest of the state. I mean, it's almost galling in a way, in my opinion. Again, there are improvements that can be made to the existing county land trust rules that could address some of these areas. But if your goal is to expand cronyism, expand corruption, expand the ability of government to act like the private sector and take more property in the state, take it off the tax rolls, own it, save it for developers and we know that rarely happens in the long run. The Kansas City Star investigation, our work, and others. If that's what for some reason that's what you want, I guess this is a good bill. But I happen to think that giving local government more authority over the private ownership of property is a terrible idea. I happen to think giving local officials the ability to, and I'll wind up soon, it won't go on for too long, I promise, Senator, but to give local officials more impact as to who can get a property. It was said earlier, it was almost said as a positive thing that the land banks created here don't have to take all the properties. They can pick and choose the properties that they want. Well, that sounds like a recipe for disaster for me, as the local government says, well, let's pick and choose these good properties, we'll hold them, we'll own them, and then we'll give them to our favorite developers eventually, instead of letting people in that area perhaps buy them off the tax rolls. I've got very detailed testimony that has been shared with everybody. Happy to answer any questions. I'm happy to take any follow-up questions later. Land banks have not worked in St. Louis or Kansas City. The land bank in St. Joseph is very new, so it's harder to make judgments there. But I know I spoke with a reporter last year who said, he really hasn't accomplished much in its short time. Land banks are not the answer for Missouri. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for your testimony. Senator Moon, we're going to, since we have a quorum, let's go ahead and take roll, and then I'll get to your question. Senate Committee on Emerging Issues being called to order. Ashley, call the roll.
Senator Brown?
Here.
Senator Moon? Here. Senator Gannon? Here. Senator Koenig? Senator McCreary? Senator Razor? Senator Shore? Here. We have quorum.
We have a quorum, and I now make a motion to move into executive session. Do I have a second? I have a second. We're in executive session. I now move that House Bill 971 and 970 be brought before the committee. Do I have a second? I have a second. All those in favor say aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The bill is before the committee. I move that House Bill 971 and 970 be voted out of committee. Do pass. Do I have a second? I have a second. This is Representative Stinnett. She presented this bill, these bills last week. They're relating to employment for people with disabilities, includes Ticket to Work Health Insurance Program and Missouri Employment First Act. Is there any discussion on that? All right, seeing none, I shall call the roll to vote House Bill 971 and 970 out of committee. Do pass.
Senator Brown?
Aye.
Senator Moon? Senator Gannon? Senator Koenig? Senator McCreary? Senator Razor? Senator Shore. Senator Moon. 5-0.
By your vote of 5-0, the motion carries. I now move that House Bill 995 be brought before the committee. Do I have a second? I have a second. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The bill is before the committee. I move that House Bill 995 be voted out of committee. Do pass. Do I have a second? I have a second. This is Representative Baker's bill that he presented last week. It prevents political subdivisions from enacting or enforcing any ordinance or regulation that prohibits the operation of licensed pet shops. Is there any discussion on that? Seeing none, I should call the roll to vote. House Bill 995 out of committee. Do pass.
Senator Brown.
Aye.
Senator Moon. Senator Gannon. Senator Koenig. Senator McCree. Senator Razor. Senator Shore. You change your vote.
I'm going to change my vote to a no.
All right, 4-1, the motion fails. Or 1-4, motion fails.
1-4, the motion fails. We'll now go to Senate Bill 369, brought before the committee. Do I have a second? I have a second. All those in favor say aye. The opposed say no. The ayes have it. The bill is before the committee. I move that Senate Bill 369 be voted out of committee. Do pass. Do I have a second? I have a second. I presented this Bill 369 last week. This is the Let People Park bill. Is there any questions on that? Any discussion?
Senator, I haven't looked at that yet. Please explain. I just read the summary. Please tell me what you're.
It won't allow any like parking tickets to be given within a mile of the Capitol.
That's cool.
You're welcome. Is there any other discussion?
Is this the opposite of a money grab? Going to be a giveaway?
Right.
Okay.
Is there any other discussion? Ask you to call the roll to vote Senate Bill 369 out of committee. Do pass.
Senator Brown.
Aye.
Senator Moon.
How are you, Jim?
Senator Gannon. Senator Koenig. Senator McCreary. Senator Razor. Senator Shore. 5-0.
By your vote of 5-0, the motion carries. I now move that Senate Bill 522 be brought before the committee. Do I have a second? I have a second. All those in favor say aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The bill is before the committee. I move that Senate Bill 522 be voted out of committee. Do pass. Do I have a second? I have a second. Senate Bill 522 was presented by Senator Ben Brown last week. Senate Bill 522 preempts any local ordinances or regulations enacted of political subdivision of the state regulating the sale of tobacco products. Is there any discussion on that? Hearing none, I shall call the roll to vote Senate Bill 522 out of committee. Do pass.
Senator Brown.
Aye.
Senator Moon. Senator Gannon. Senator Koenig. Senator McCreary. Senator Razor. Senator Shore. 4-1.
By your vote of 4-1, the motion carries. I now make a motion to move out of executive session, resume a regular hearing. Do I have a second? I have a second. We are out of executive session. Or Senator Moon, I think you had a question for the witness.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Stokes, thank you for your testimony. You mentioned or alluded to some ideas that would improve the current land bank program. Can you divulge any of that at this time?
No, I mean, what I mean is some of the prior testimony from supporters of the bill highlighted some parts of the bill, such as focused on making it easier to clear title for purchases purchased out of the existing land trust sales. And I don't have any opposition to that. But so what I'm saying is you can address that problem with land trust sales by just amending the land trust ordinance or the land trust statutes. We don't have to go to allowing every city or county and state to create its own land bank, which is proven to be a recipe for failure and worse in St. Louis and Kansas City. We can do it a much simpler way with just adjusting the land trust part.
Thank you. Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, Senators.
Any testimony for informational purposes only? Opposition? Any more opposition testimony? Seeing none, any for information purposes only? Seeing none. I did not get direction from the chair, so I will wait for his direction. It looks like he's back, so he's going to take the seat again.
Representative Hardwick, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Bill Hardwick, here to present House Bill 1120. House Bill 1120 changes the advertising requirements for property that's sold after it's been foreclosed upon from a lead storage facility. If there's somebody who has personal property in a storage facility, they don't pay their rent, there's a procedure that property can be taken by the facility owner. This doesn't change that, any of those due process requirements. It just says that once they possess it, when they advertise it, it could be in a newspaper, which is the rule now, but it adds in a commercially reasonable manner, which could be online with 3 independent bidders. And I kind of think it makes sense, especially for a district like mine, where there's a transient population, military population, and while there's a newspaper that qualifies in the county, there's not one in my district. And with that, I'll stop and see if there are any questions from the committee.
Thank you, Representative Hardwick. Are there any questions? Senator Bean.
Representative, thank you for your introduction of the bill. I noticed there was a change in the relating to title, but I didn't see any change in the actual purpose of the bill. What was the change for?
I don't think that, so it talked about lien storage, lien foreclosures, and the bill actually doesn't deal with the lien foreclosure part. It deals with the advertisement in a commercially reasonable manner. So I think it's actually more fitting, but no, there were no amendments added to it in the House.
Are there any other questions for witness? Senator Razor.
Just very quickly, the online portion is in addition to print.
Yes, Senator. Yes, Senator. They could still use the newspaper route, but they can use an alternative, commercially reasonable method to advertise.
In addition.
They could do or in this under this bill. They could not use a newspaper. They could use a commercially reasonable manner instead of a newspaper.
Okay.
Any other questions for the witness? Seeing none, first witness testify in favor of the bill. Whenever you're ready.
Good morning. My name is Chris Holloway. I've been in the storage industry for 18 years. I'm currently the vice president of the Missouri Self-Storage Owners Association, and if everything goes as planned, I'll be the president next week. I own facilities right here in Jefferson City, and I have facilitated hundreds of auctions over the years. Along with our membership, we are in strong favor of this bill. I was fortunate enough to have heard the opposition the last time I spoke with you and discovered that there was a misunderstanding, and I would like to take this time to address it. By the time a customer goes to auction, they have received no less than 3 letters, one of them being certified. They've received calls, texts, emails, and then a call to an alternative contact, which sometimes we get in trouble for doing that. At this point, the customer is actively dodging us. The purpose of this ad was misrepresented to you the last time we spoke. Its intended purpose is to ensure a fair sale. The contents by attracting at least 3 bidders. This was fine in the 80s when newspapers were relevant and the auctions were done live on site. Today, we facilitate them online, similar to eBay. I have buyers as far as Tennessee come in, and I guarantee you they didn't see it in my local newspaper. The opposition stated that they were concerned for our tenants and their family and that they should be informed via the newspaper. Here's an example of a classified ad that I'm currently required by law to post in the classified section in the local publication. On April 16th, 2023 at 1 p.m., Pro Storage Center located at 2003 Midland Court will have Unit 337 for sale or other disposition. My customers never remember their unit numbers, so I find it doubtful that Aunt Karen would see this ad and know whose unit it is. Would you have us post the client's name and publicly shame them to all of the retirement homes receiving the newspaper? Aunt Karen gets the call when they get the auction letter. I appreciate the concern the opposition has for my customers and their family. I only wish they would take care of their own, as again, I'm legally required to be their customer. You see, part of the requirements is for us to close the account is to have the affidavit of publication sent to us by our newspaper. This sometimes takes months to receive after a multitude of phone calls and emails, and the entire ad process leaves the storage operator vulnerable for litigation and is completely irrelevant in the auction process in the current era. Thank you. Is there any questions? Thank you.
Members of the committee, my name is Mike Burnham. I am President and Chief Investment Officer for a company located in Columbia, Missouri with international operations exclusively in self-storage. We operate 300 stores in U.S., Canada, and the U.K. In Missouri, we operate 28, and I live in Columbia where we're headquartered. I'm here to go through I was here 28 years ago when we passed the initial state lien law statute, and we've since modernized it several times since then. And I'm here again for the fourth time to go through and help to rationalize and modernize it just a little bit more to keep us up with modern times. In Missouri alone, we hold about 300 auctions per year. We lose about $75,000 per year. We still go through accepting with the statute and preferring the sellouts. And most of the time before we ever get to a sellout, we offer people to pay and just move out for nothing. So this is our last result to go through and just go through and get the opportunity to re-rent the unit. The last 10 years, the online auction business has proliferated in our business and everybody else's to the point that we operate in 20 states. 18 of those 20 states allow or newspaper advertising or online advertising, and that's what we're here to go through and promote. That just allow us to do and do both ways, or choose which one we think will generate the best proceeds for the auction to make sure that our tenant goes through and returned any amount of proceeds if possible. So with that, I'll answer any questions that you may have.
Any other questions? Are there any questions for the witness? All right, seeing none, thank you. Next witness testifying in favor of the bill. All right, are there any witnesses to testify in opposition? Whenever you're ready.
Good morning, committee members. My name is Mark Millsap. I'm the general manager of the News Tribune here in Jefferson City, the Fulton Sun, and the California Democrat. All of my newspapers are proud members of the Missouri Press Association. We're opposed to this bill for two reasons. One, my first reason, there's a flaw in the bill. The flaw is the bill has no penalties or actions if less than 3 bidders show up for the sale or bid on the unit. That's one. My bigger reason for the opposition to this bill is that newspaper notices of self-storage facility auctions increases transparency if they're put in the newspaper. Such notices are part of the due process. Large segments of rural Missouri are without strong internet, and residents without internet still depend on their local newspapers to get their news and information. This bill means such notices would be switched to somewhere on the web. A person won't see a self-storage facility auction notice until if he or she does not have a computer, a device, or anything in their household that could get the internet. These newspaper notices alert family, friends, even next-door neighbors of the property owner, as well as potential bidders that a sale of property is about to happen. And as the first gentleman spoke, I do have a copy of a classified ad for a self-storage unit. This happened to be in a Columbia newspaper, and there is a name along with the unit number inside this ad. So maybe the requirements of the notices need to have more information in there about what needs to be in there, including the name of the person, so that family members, loved ones, things like that, those people can know what's going on with that unit. Websites notify no one. A website does not push out or distribute notices to anyone. However, in a newspaper notice, which is distributed to homes and businesses, a reader may see his or her property is being sold at auction. Simply placing the notice on the internet does not promote transparency. A couple clarifications I do want to talk about was every county in Missouri does have at least one newspaper operating. So people that say that newspapers aren't viable, every county does have a newspaper operating in the state of Missouri. Also, to your clarification, I think about the or the and, it's actually or. So that if you don't have to put it in the newspapers, you can put it online somewhere. And what is reasonably commercial? What is that? Is that Facebook? Is that Facebook Marketplace? Is that social media? That may not even be a website. So again, that's why transparency is so important, and keeping these in newspapers is very important to the public. Thank you.
Any questions for the witness? Senator Boone.
Just help me understand
Sure.
who this benefits. Is it the owner of the storage unit, or is it the potential buyer of the contents?
Well, I think it'd benefit both, right? The owner has been noticed or needs to have notice. The family members may need to have notice. Family members may have some stuff in there with grandma's storage unit, possibly. They need to know that maybe, something happened to grandma and the storage unit was there, and they need to know about this. And again, I've got an example of where names and numbers and places are listed in a notice.
Could that last potential problem be circumvented by putting something in the contract if the person renting the storage unit said, I want to be notified personally or at this particular location or in this particular manner? Would that solve the problem?
I think it could be. I don't know what a contract is for a self-storage unit. Maybe they have that. Maybe they have it in there right now. Yeah. That's a great suggestion.
Yeah. And I see your point about you're talking from the newspaper standpoint where you're potentially going to lose revenues. So I understand.
It's possible, yes, sir.
I understand that. And I think I may understand your conflict, but I'm not sure if I truly understand, because I think eventually someone's going to be noticed. I think there are probably hawks out there looking for these opportunities. So they're going to find out and scouring whatever publication to find them. So I think they're there. So maybe we can talk later, but I think maybe we're talking about two different things.
Yeah, we'd be happy to work with the bill's author on different things. We just or commercially a commercial place to do it. I think it came up in committee at one point about Facebook Marketplace. Is that a good place to put? Is that reasonably commercial to put these notices? Does that work on social media? I mean, you got a website, you've got newspapers. On our public notices, I will say too, we actually put those on our websites as well. And also the Missouri Press Association has a website for legal notices. So it's out there online for people to find as well.
And for those looking on like a Facebook marketplace, if you're looking for it, you're going to find it.
That is true. But again, you're not going to be necessarily notified, and it's not pushed out to you on Facebook as well. Thank you.
Any other questions for the witness? All right, seeing none. Thank you. Any other witnesses testify in opposition? All right, seeing none. Next bill we're going to do is House Bill 424, Representative Perkins. We may want to speed this up a little bit if we can, because we've got we've got your bill and Representative Mayhew's to go as well. So
thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chad Perkins, the 40th District, Pike and Lincoln County. The license office bill, as you know, license offices are privately owned businesses. They're dealing with the same thing every other private business is. That's inflation. What they used to pay somebody $12 an hour for, they now have to pay someone $18 an hour for. So this would just take the one-year license fee from $6 to $9 on a license plate, and that's 424 in a nutshell.
All right, thank you. Any questions for witness? Seeing none. Any witnesses to testify in favor of it? Whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, Jim Coyne, representing the Missouri Association of License Officers. We want to go in and support the record. Obviously, we've already heard the bill. There's three things in the bill: fee increase, the cooling off period for the Department of Revenue employees that oversee it, and then the license office distribution fund. Those are the three things that are increasing in the bill, and they did include some in the House, some license fix up on some of the license. So that's it.
Any questions for a witness? All right. Seeing none. Next witness to testify in favor of the bill. Are the witnesses to testify in opposition? All right. Seeing none. Next we have HJR37, Representative Mayhew. Whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Don Mayhew, State Representative for District 124, which includes parts of Pulaski and Miller counties. Judging by the crowd, it looks like I have the least controversial bill today. Before you is HJR37. It's a simple bill in content, but has generated some pretty dramatic rhetoric. House Joint Resolution 37 simply removes the words "and stand appropriated" without legislative action. Before you is for your convenience is the portion of the Constitution which includes those words.
Very simply, HJR37 simply returns the Constitution to its original intent, and that being putting MoDOT on the same level as every other state department, the same oversight and accountability process that we use with every other state department. Our forefathers knew that any government of men, no matter how magnanimous or altruistic or virtuous in its origins, is subject to the less than honorable intentions of a few. That is why our Constitution employs the checks and balances that is the very foundation of our republic. Checks and balances simply keeps honest people honest. And that's what it's in there for. By returning the Constitution to its original intent, it restores these very important checks and balances. We depend on these every day in this building. In order to understand the importance of HJR37, we must first explore its origins. Before you have the advertisement that was in a newspaper, the Kansas City Star, the week before the changes to the Constitution occurred. And you'll notice that those words were not in the Constitution until 1979, when an initiative petition was put on the ballot to raise the gas tax. The original full ballot language is not immediately available. I'm sure it's out there somewhere, but the only thing I could find was that sample ballot language that we see in newspapers every time there are proposals on the ballot. Specifically, you will notice that there is no mention of the word stands appropriated in the language. And I'm sure that it was presented by whoever proposed it to the voters with what we call ballot candy to increase the CART fund. You'll notice that in that language right there, the CART fund goes from 5% to 15%. And the CART fund, as you well know, is the fund that's used to take a portion of the gas tax and give to the counties for the off-system roads or the non-MoDOT roads. I'm sure most of the voters did not know nor understand the ramifications of those words. And what I would say also is most voters do not even know the difference between allocation and appropriation. I submit to you that the language, likely questionable in its origin, as at the very least deserves to be revisited by the people. You're likely to hear today from more than one witness behind me several different things. They will likely claim that MoDOT cannot plan on a year-to-year basis and that they will only be able to build projects that can be built in a year because we in the legislature only budget on an annual basis. Well, can't every state department make that exact same claim? And yet somehow we're able to support programs like Medicaid, which is multi-year, and we've been able to do it every year. SEMA, which their planning extends out for several years. And in fact, we just did, back when I first came in to the House, the Focus on Bridges program, which is a 6-year program. In fact, this year, we are going to be asked through the budget process to commit several $billion to a multi-year project. Well, so if we can't do a commitment to multi-year, then how, pray tell, are we going to be able to do it with this $2.8 billion that's being proposed? Some will likely say that the language removes the politics out of transportation funding decisions. Okay, I'm sure you're aware of how the commission is currently selected. Well, are we to suspect or suggest that there is no politics involved in that process? The very process that MoDOT uses to determine the allocation of money throughout the state is filled with politics. In fact, many of MoDOT documents talks about how some districts don't have enough money to complete large projects. Well, I assume this means that the allocation to the districts is insufficient for the needs in that arbitrarily drawn boundary. Last time I checked, the name of the department was the Missouri State Highway and Transportation Commission and the Missouri Department of Transportation. That certainly implies a statewide mission. So how is it that we will ignore an obvious priority in some district in a statewide system simply because of an arbitrary decision about how a boundary is created and how money is allocated to that district. That sounds a lot like a political decision to me. Shouldn't the proper way to plan be based on the priorities of those transportation needs and not the allocations based on arbitrarily drawn boundaries? I think it's obvious. This, of course, would mean that some districts in some years would have more money allocated to them than some others in order to meet the needs of a particular priority. That's exactly why we're talking about I-70 right now. At the same time, we see a 30% inflation rate in MoDOT projects when at the same time in heavy non-highway construction is running about 14%. Aren't you the least bit curious of why? Over the same time that I have been in the legislature, now going on my 5th year, we have seen MoDOT's budget increase from $2.5 to $3.5 billion. What have we got with that increase? We see a 30% that's 30% inflation rate, and I'm suggesting that without proper accountability and a proper oversight, that perhaps we need to question why it's 30%. Last year we gave several $1 million to MoDOT in excess of what they are already being, including the gas tax, including additional federal funds. The point is that we are turning over an unprecedented sums of the people's money to this department with no legislative oversight and very little ability to demand any accountability. With that, Mr. Chair, I will take any questions.
I've got a couple, but I'll give some other members the opportunity as well. But I don't doubt your sincerity, what you're trying to accomplish with this, but I'll be honest with you, I have a lot of problems with this. And one of them is you were talking about, these, how political, some of these commissioners are or whatever. I mean, do you honestly think if the General Assembly was in charge of these projects that it wouldn't get political? My main concern would be is that most of the projects would probably be in the Speaker of the House district, the Appropriations Chairman's district, the House Budget Chairman's district, the President Pro Tem's district, and then legislators like you and I in outstate Missouri would basically get screwed.
So, point taken, but a lot has changed since 1979. We have balanced budget amendment in the state, and we have term limits. Let's face it, if the budget chair on the House side wants the road paved in front of his house, he's got to get at least 82 members of the House of Representatives to agree with him. The same could be said over on this side of the building, where it takes 18 members in order to do this same thing. My suggestion is that we're not talking about whether or not a political decision is made. I think the political decision's already been made, especially whenever we're talking about how we go about planning and funding projects. So let's take I-70 for an example, just because it's a handy one. Not one of the projects that have been proposed with the original $859 million is in either Tier 1, Tier 2, or Tier 3 of the high priority unfunded needs. They exist in their printed form in some way, but they are not currently on the current STIP, which is a 5-year plan, and they are not in any of Tier 1, Tier 2, or Tier 3 high priority unfunded needs. So it would seem to me that if we are going to use a priority matrix, if we are going to allocate funds where they are most needed in the state of Missouri, at the very least, we should have probably looked at funding the Tier 1 and perhaps a good portion of the Tier 2 unfunded high priority needs. Had these projects been in that matrix, I would have no argument with that. However, they are not.
Well, since you mentioned funding, so another question you bring to my mind is, and correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm Director McKenna, you can, just feel free to speak up, but our districts are mainly lettered highways, correct?
We have a considerable amount of lettered blacktop, absolutely.
And correct me if I'm wrong, we receive no federal funding on lettered highways in this state. It's all state funds.
About 2/3 of the lettered highways do not receive.
Okay, so that's another concern that I have when, in my mind, this gets super political to what happens to our lettered roads when all the money is being put in these urban area projects. If the
Well-
General Assembly is going to manage these, these allocations of these monies and these jobs and where it goes, so.
As you recall, we devoted $100 million to low-volume roads last year out of the ARPA funds. We're most likely going to do that again this year. Also, keep in mind that the gas tax, true, but an overlay lasts more than a year. So, and we're talking about overlays. And add to that the fact that the gas tax itself that we passed in 2021 is accumulating at considerably higher than what was projected. At full implementation, it was projected to do $550 million a year. Now, a good portion of that, at least it was sold to me, that would go toward those very same low-volume roads that we're talking about. And so if we're talking about at the very low end of this thing, something on the order of 30% more than where we're going to be at is full implementation of the $550 million by the last quarter of this year. So, does that mean we end up with a surplus? Certainly. Does that mean that we end up with funds that we could put on other things other than that? Well, perhaps. But if $550 million was the thing to do the trick, then, and we add another $200 million to the low-volume roads, then I think we probably get a long ways toward accomplishing the goal that you and I have in our district.
Does any other witnesses or have a question for the witness? Go ahead, Senator Razor.
Thank you, Representative. I'm curious, I'm assuming since you refer to this as appropriating like we would any other department, it's not an up or down vote on the whole thing. We could nix certain projects if we wanted to.
Well, none of the budgets I've seen come over as specific projects. It's department budget line items. So in various categories.
But then in another section, we're requiring MoDOT to follow the STIP.
Correct.
Yes. So if we know the STIP, we know where that money's going in the budget. And if, let's say we didn't like a particular project, or I oftentimes say that the most urban and the most rural districts, having lived in both, have more in common than we like to admit.
No, I agree with you.
Your lettered routes and my mom's lettered route aren't getting fixed, and I'm a Democrat. Money's not coming to my district, even though we have 500,000 people coming to town this weekend for the NFL draft and the World coming in a few weeks. They ain't going to fix the roads around my district. I drove to Columbia last night, and I still think the 6370 interchange needs an overhaul, but it should not be because Senator Rowden is pro tem. It should be because that's the most important project. And I agree with the chairman that if we put this in the hands of politicians, it gets much more politicized.
So do we do that with Department of Public Safety? Do we politicize things that...
Has that been politicized at all in the last few years?
Have no idea. I mean, from my perspective, no.
Okay.
Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, we could go through the list. I mean, let's face it, the reality is that this isn't MoDOT's money, nor is the general revenue that we're dedicating to, but specifically the general revenue that we're going to be dedicating to I-70. That's an interstate highway, and we are planning on putting general revenue on that, committing to that for 10 years. Well, there's a big difference between us committing general revenue for the purposes of matching federal funds to do that exact same construction and putting complete general revenue on that particular route. Keep in mind that that's general revenue that was collected for the purposes of doing a lot of other things in the state of Missouri. And you're going to find that I'm a big fan of doing those transportation projects because that's something hard and fast that we can do. However, because it is statewide money, it probably should be applied in a statewide fashion and then rely more heavily, like we always have done, on that federal match.
So
yeah.
2 questions. Yeah, it's coming from general revenue. I think a lot of it is ARPA funds probably. So thank you, President Biden, for fixing I-70 for us. And I didn't hear any Republicans voting for it. And secondly, and if we have to follow the STIP precisely, we had a situation a few years ago, and Director, correct me if I'm wrong, where the Buck O'Neill Bridge in Kansas City was scheduled to be overhauled, and then we found how bad of condition the Rocheport Bridge was, so we pushed one back to tackle the other. Didn't that happen that way, essentially?
Yeah, there wasn't enough money to complete both.
Yes, yes. But if we were following the STIP, and they were bound by law to follow the STIP, we're going to have to close the Rocheport Bridge because the Buck O'Neill Bridge was open or on the STIP before Rocheport until we figured out how bad of condition it was.
So wouldn't you think that that would be the perfect thing to notify the legislature of? By it being in the STIP removes the chance of the politics getting involved in that minute detail of how they do transportation planning. But the Buck O'Neill Bridge, perhaps that's something should have been looked at years ahead and put in the STIP or moved its way through those high priority unfunded needs projects. I would submit that perhaps we should be asking them about that planning process at some point. Certainly emergencies arise, but we allow for that. That's allowed for in the Constitution.
Do you allow for that in the bill, though? Because it ties the hands to
All we're
follow the
doing,
STIP.
it does not tie their hands. It says that they will use that as priority. Now, if they have to enter into and make changes within the STIP, well, that's certainly something that the legislature should voice a concern about other than emergency situations. And not unlike what we had just discussed about the high priority unfunded needs. Keep in mind that's a document that's available to us as legislators and also to the general public to notify them of what projects are coming down the pipe.
I think, yeah, and I'll end with this, Mr. Chairman. I just think those unfunded needs very quickly become rural routes and inner city highways because we're the ones with the least power. We're going to have interstates of gold in the suburbs, but you and I are going to struggle.
Yeah, but perhaps a misconception of what that actually means, that high priority unfunded need. That is where projects, my understanding, through the planning process, they have identified and placed them in Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 to set up a priority matrix, and then those projects filter down into the STIP, into the 5-year part of the STIP. So it's not like that's a wish list per se. That's a pool of projects that they can pull from to fill in.
I've sat through 8 years worth of Northwest Missouri STIP planning, and it's a beautiful process, actually. I agree with that.
Are there any other questions for the witness? Senator Min.
Just briefly, thank you, Representative. Just to clarify, this includes both like the I-70, I-44, and all the numbered routes as well, right?
So it would have influence there for sure. It's what we're talking about is funding, which is our only constitutional duty in reality, is to keep an eye on people's money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. My comment won't solve the problem, but I've talked to engineers in my area for quite a while about the 3-year plan for improving and overlays, you call it, the chip and seals and things like that. To my knowledge, unless it's changed, there's a 3-year plan. And my question was, what happens in 3 years if this particular route comes up on the plan to improve the roadway, but it's still in good shape? Well, they improved the roadway in some form or fashion, which didn't make sense to me. And so the last time they did it was terrible. And it's just an obvious misapplication of the materials on the roadway. So we created more problems. So I think yours is going down a different line, but I think the entire scheme needs to be relooked at to determine what's appropriate, and we can overlook a roadway if it's not in need at that time. But I'd like to talk to you more about this because it's intriguing me to looking at the materials you handed out as well. Something perhaps could be changed, and I'd like to talk to you more about your idea. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Are there any other questions for the witness? All right, seeing none. How many people do we have testifying in opposition to this? How many in favor of? In favor of, come on. Make it fast because we got a lot of opposition to hear.
I understand, Mr. Chairman, but I have some experiences to state in my experience of the Transportation Commission, and I really want to make it a matter of public record. Good morning. My name is Arnie C. A.C. Dinoff, State Public Advocate, and here's my form. Representative Mayhew is right on point. MoDOT and the Missouri Transportation Commission is way out of bounds. The Missouri Transportation Commission acts like the state country club, and the members, including the director, think that they're entitled to certain expenses and certain things that Missourians don't get. I believe that they shall be subject to the appropriations bill. They are suing you as elected officials in the Cole County Circuit Court, which is costing taxpayers hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees. MoDOT and the Missouri Transportation Commission is way out of control. Director Patrick McKenna's contract, I have asked for 2 years, and he refuses to give me his contract. I have asked the Transportation Commission meetings over and over and over, and his attorneys fight me at every corner. My only avenue and recourse is to take him to Cole County Circuit Court or St. Charles County Circuit Court and have a judge issue an injunction and force them to turn over those documents. He was given a 30% pay raise during COVID. And what did Mr. McKinnon do? He turned around and gave 33 of his central office employees right next door a pay raise. And it was on the hush-hush, and he refuses to disclose that to the public. I have asked for, they are a very non-transparent organization. Their meeting packets, for example, they put their agenda online. I asked for those supporting documents, which are hundreds of pages. They are the last public board or commission in the state to put it on the electronic system of the state computer system or their website. And I make a public information request under Chapter 610.023, asking for that information. And I believe their attorney right there sends me a letter and wants to charge me thousands of dollars because they say it's going to take umpteen staff time when all they do is push a simple button and forward me that packet, which is in PDF forms that they give their 6 commissioners. It's ridiculous, senators. It's ridiculous when I go to the transportation committees of how these people, MoDOT administrators, treat me like dirt. If they treat me like dirt, they're going to treat other Missourians like dirt. And it's a shame. They won't even pay for somebody who lost their life. MoDOT employees who lost their life in South St. Louis County, they're fighting those families and paying out life insurance policies and pension payments. And they're putting these Missouri families through hell. I'm very vocal, and I'm very upset at the Missouri Transportation Commission. They are embarrassing. They are secretive. They are non-transparent in every angle and every avenue.
Arnie, let's stay on topic of the bill, please. I mean, are we talking about funding transportation? Or are we talking about how bad you hate the commission and Patrick McKenna?
It's that they need to be held.
I mean, wrap this up.
He needs to be held
start
accountable
session
and
real
responsible
quick.
with appropriations.
We got a lot of witnesses to go
through
through,
the state
so
legislature.
I'm giving you about 2 more minutes.
I think that we need elected commissioners from 8 congressional districts with one commissioner selected at large statewide in an election by the people. The Transportation Commission needs major improvement. They're way out of bounds and out of control. I am in support of this bill and this constitutional question. To Missourians, MoDOT and the Transportation Commission needs to be held accountable and responsible. They have terrible current leadership. And just look at the director's contract. He's one of the most paid
Thank you for your
executives.
testimony, Arnie. Are there any questions for this witness? And by the way, everything you just mentioned is public knowledge because I'm assuming that MoDOT goes through an audit, at least once every year? So everything you just talked about, you can find that either online or in hard copy.
But they don't want to turn it over and charge thousands of dollars
They have
in
to.
fees.
It's all public knowledge. They do that.
Well, then why don't you
So
help
are
me
there
get
any other
it?
questions for the
Why don't you
witness?
be an advocate and stand up and help me get
Thank
that
you for your
information?
testimony. Is there any other witnesses to testify in favor of the HJR? First witness to testify in opposition, please come forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Patrick McKenna, and I'm the director of the Missouri Department of Transportation. I'm here to testify in opposition of HJR37. The Commission and MoDOT have well-documented, transparent public process of project selection, which are included in the statewide transportation improvement program, along with the unfunded, high-priority unfunded needs, which is kind of an on-deck list of projects. This project of project selection is done in partnership with local, regional planning organizations and the metropolitan planning organizations made up of locally elected officials with input from the public at the local level. Projects are picked at the local level and work their way up through. They're prioritized. The presumption I think that's made in this bill is that somehow we are completely funded. We are not. The needs of this system, which is the 7th largest in the nation, has typically been funded near the bottom of transportation organizations in the country relative to the scale of the system. So the commission process and the current process of that project selection throughout is about allocating scarcity. There's scarcity and then prioritizing that. And it is disappointing when we can't get to a priority project for a region, but it's within that region that those selections are made, along with the department's addition of engineering expertise to make sure that we are replacing things like bridges before they go into disrepair and have to be closed. We're here to keep it safe. Currently, the Commission approves the annual appropriations of highway funds, enabling private sector contractors to be assured of their multi-year projects are funded. The Commission brings and has traditionally brought its budget through the governor and through the legislative process. We've done that despite the legislative appropriation language that exists in the Constitution, and we would anticipate that we'd do that into the future. The current STIP has more than 1,800 projects worth a total of $10 billion, and about 90% of those are multi-year projects. Single year rather than multi-year planning would result from HJR37, and it could jeopardize the long-term planning of road and bridge projects. The Commission does provide and will continue to provide that annual budget, and we do believe that short-term thinking would be brought into the planning process. It would jeopardize the local impact and the local planning process that is it's recognized nationally as one of the best in the country. We do a lot with the resources that we have available to maintain this system, 7th largest and funded at 48th in the nation, and we believe this provision, if implemented, would do severe damage to the planning process. With that, I'll answer any questions, sir.
Thank you, Director. That's where I was getting at with my comment earlier about I would afraid that we would there would be about 4 people get their projects funded in this building. I mean, it would. I'm glad you said that because it totally eliminates the process of like our county commission, our municipality leaders haven't been involved in the conversation of what road needs to be fixed, whether it be in my area Highway 6372 or even 44.
The beauty, thank you for that comment. The beauty of the way the Commission has structured this, by federal regulation, we have to, there is sub-allocation of federal funds that goes to the larger communities in the state. So it's St. Louis, Kansas City, and Springfield primarily receive sub-allocated funds, so communities over 200,000. And we have to bring a dedicated local planning process to those areas. What the commission has done is extended that same authority to all regional planning commissions, even though the federal government does not mandate that, because we do believe that that with limited and scarce resources, the best decisions get made at the local level.
And you're talking about like Merrimack Regional Planning Commission,
Yes.
things like that, with
Yes.
every commissioner in my district, you know, it has a say in that or sits on the board.
That's right. In
Very
addition-
important.
Yes.
Yeah, I preach that to people in my district all the time, how important it is for us to have, you know, county commissioners like on that board
right.
because of the planning process with these road projects.
And
When I
working-
have a interstate running through my district and several numbered and lettered highways, so.
And
anyway.
working through those planning commissions are about 1,200 volunteers on transportation advisory commissions, so local leaders that participate in that project selection process.
Thank you. Are there any questions, Senator Moon?
Director McKenna, you mentioned that currently the department presents its budget needs to the legislature.
Yes.
How do you suppose, if the Constitution were changed, that would impact and whether negatively or positively your abilities, since you already present your budget needs? How would that change?
We do. The primary change is in the planning cycle. So the commission requires the department to bring forward estimates of financial resources on a 5 and a 10-year basis. We do that, and then the commission reviews the department's request, including all the work that's compiled in the statewide transportation improvement program, and we estimate the cash flow needs of, currently we have approximately 650 active construction projects going on in the state. Now, the planning cycle for some of those projects is on a multi-year basis. So the environmental work, the project development work is very typically about a 2-year cycle just to bring a project ready for construction. And a lot of those things are not in our control. They're, if we need to secure land right away, we may need to go through the courts for that. Scheduling utility relocation, doing the environmental work, and doing the design of the project itself. Now, that project development work can be upwards of, in the more complicated projects, 15 to 20% of the overall project cost. So if we're to outlay that 15 to 20%, and that on the scale that we're dealing with, just look at I-70, a nearly $3 billion project. You could be looking at $400 million of project development work. If we're not assured in the future that we will fund the construction of that project, what you end up doing is building a cycle of a lot of things ready to go. And then the potential is that the political will changes as to where the work should go. So that multi-year planning process and the outlay of resources, taxpayer resources, to get ready for that construction may not actually provide the construction itself, and that would be a tremendous waste of resource.
So in your opinion, if the Constitution were changed, where the legislature would have a little bit more oversight, it would negatively impact your ability to fund the projects and hold the money back in reserve to get those things done?
Yes.
Could not the legislature do that for you and appropriate as necessary?
Well, I think that the answer to that is of any circumstance could be applied. I think that the ability to have to build and maintain such a large infrastructure and to do the planning that we do, the planning itself would be negatively impacted, and I do believe it would be a less efficient delivery mechanism of construction projects all the way through completion. We could have a cycle where we do a lot more planning, and then what happens through that is you take less risk. You take less multi-year risk on those larger projects that are really some of the economic drivers in the state.
Any other questions for the witness?
And if I might, I'd just like to, I really appreciate the presence of Commissioner Warren Erdman is here today, newest member of the commission, and had recently gone through confirmation with you. I think you're all well aware of, in terms of oversight, Mr. Erdman is very well versed in this, and I can assure you that he is applying oversight pretty rapidly in his tenure. So just want to welcome him and thank him for being here.
Thank you for being here, Commissioner. We're going to have a hard stop about 11:45 to give the committee members an opportunity to grab something to eat before we start session at noon. So next witness to testify in opposition whenever you're ready.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Jeff Glenn here on behalf of Missourians for Transportation Investment. I had prepared testimony this morning that I'm quite certain would have ended in thunderous applause and the hardest of men weeping. But I'll shelve that just to say that we are opposed to HJR37 for a lot of the reasons that the chairman has already stated and the director has expanded upon. Primarily among those is a concern over the process of selecting projects. There is a process in place that has worked for decades where local planning partners get together, identify the projects that are important to their areas, and that funnels its way up through that process to make it into that STIP. There was a little bit of conversation earlier about the fact that Interstate 70 wasn't included in the STIP, and my experience, having been involved in that process extensively in the past, is there's a very good reason for that. It's a lack of funding. When those local planning partners get together and they prioritize those projects, because there is a lack of funding, a large mega project like Interstate 70, it ends up being the #1 priority for that particular regional partner, but they realize that if they forward that as their objective, they won't get any other projects for their particular region. And so they move it down the list, and those projects keep getting moved down the list, and they never get done. And that's why it's important that we have a process in place like we do now to address 70 using the surplus funding that we have available. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Are there questions for the witness? Thank you for your testimony. Next witness to testify in opposition.
Mr. Chairman, Shannon Cooper today representing the Greater Kansas City Chamber of Commerce as well as the Civic Council of Greater Kansas City. We want to go on record in opposition and bringing today the voice of the business community from Kansas City. Since 1913, when MoDOT was formed, we have always had a great relationship where we worked with them for the long-term needs of our community, but also recognizing that every part of the state needs to be taken care of. Everybody, whether you're in a rural or urban or suburban area, every citizen has transportation needs. The STIP process allows local leaders to participate in that to make sure that everybody is taken care of fairly. I can see nothing but a nightmare coming about if this legislation would pass. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for the witness, Senator Moon?
Just briefly, 1913.
Yes.
You're looking good for being that old.
I was proud to be part of that.
But
that was a joke.
And mine was too.
Okay.
But what you're talking about, the fairness of treatment and everybody's needs taken care of, isn't that the purpose of the STEP plan?
Yes.
So I guess I'm confused. If that's the purpose would probably continue no matter how the money is appropriated, it seems. Wouldn't that be right? I mean,
Senator, I don't want to be offensive, but I think the chairman made a very good point on, you know as well as I do how the process works over here. And with the STIP program, our local leaders, whether you're from Kansas City or Marble Hill, Missouri, you have the opportunity to put together your presentation, present it with local leaders through the STIP program so that everybody has an opportunity to be heard, and the department can create a long-term plan that addresses the transportation needs of everyone in the state.
There's no offense taken, you
Okay.
know me. But more conversation probably needs to be had.
I'm happy to visit with you.
Are there any other questions for the witness? Well, I think I got to say, I'll keep going back to it. It eliminates the rural areas or in our districts to having a say and what gets done in these projects. I mean, that's why we have Merrimack Regional Planning Commissions or planning commissions. I'm sure, Senator Moon, you have one in your district, but they all have a say of what projects are going to be looked at and prioritize those.
I don't want to
whether
say
they do them or not, but they are involved in it. Is what you eliminate the local level planning.
That's correct. And
And
I can
participation.
I can speak from experience as an old has-been around here that back when I was in office, the best way to make sure that the needs were taken care of in the counties I represented was to work with my local planning partners to make sure that their voices were heard at the
We
department.
love
with
to
the
talk about
commissioners.
local control in the Senate side over here. We talk about it every day.
Until
And
it
we're
doesn't work.
eliminating local control.
Until it doesn't work for us.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Do any other witnesses testify in opposition?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Andy Ernst. I'm a Senior Vice President with Pace Construction Company in St. Louis, Missouri. And I'm a member of the AGC of Missouri, and I am here to represent their position on this. I also serve on the AGC Board of Directors. AGC Missouri has nearly 550 member firms and is the only construction industry association in Missouri that represents commercial, building, highway and transportation, and utility infrastructure firms. Our membership includes union and open shop contractors, large and small contractors, general and specialty contractors, and urban and rural contractors. The breadth of our membership also spans to 110 of Missouri's counties. AGC Missouri is opposed to HJR37. Our transportation contractors depend upon the certainty that MoDOT statewide transportation improvement plan provides. The STIP provides a 5-year plan, updated annually, is developed through the extensive efforts of our regional planning authorities, and approved by the Missouri Highways and Transportation Commission. This system has worked well for decades in Missouri. We understand that no system is flawless, yet contractors know that they can rely on this plan. The potential changes that would occur if HJR 37 is enacted would negatively impact our industry. We appreciate your consideration of this testimony and encourage you to oppose HJR 37.
Thank you for your testimony. Is there a question for a witness? Seeing none. Nick, I'm surprised you're in.
Good morning,
opposing
Mr.
this. I
Chairman.
figured
I'll
you'd
cut
be on
you
the other
off
side of
before you
this
can
deal.
say anything. Do what?
I figured you'd be on the other side of this deal. I'm shocked you're opposing this.
Gee, I am too, somewhat. Not really, as you and I previously spoke. Morgan Mendel with the American Council of Engineering Companies in Missouri. I represent 110 Missouri-based engineering companies in the state. We're going to go on record officially against this. We think it's an ill-conceived bill and has negative ramifications, not only for the state, but for all of the citizens. Mr. Chairman, I'll be very short. I want to expand on a question that you asked earlier. Director McKenna, you're audited once a year?
By many different groups.
And by outside CPA firms?
Yes.
Do you know of any state department that is audited more than the Missouri Department of Transportation?
No.
So that makes you the most audited department. So I believe there's probably a lot of transparency there. The other comment that I want to make is I-70 is very much indeed on the unfunded needs list. It has been on the unfunded needs list for a number of years. Missouri started to work on I-70 in 2006 with the environmental work, and basically they ran out of money in the funding streams. So to say that I-70 has not been a priority for MoDOT before is just doesn't hold merit. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for a witness? Seeing none. Thank you, Morgan. Next witness to testify in opposition, please come forward.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Ray McCarty, President of Associated Industries in Missouri, here today representing Associated Industries in Missouri and also the Missouri Transportation and Development Council, which was actually founded in the 20s to help get Missouri out of the mud. So it's a long history organization. I'm going to take a little bit different tack than some of the previous witnesses. We are opposed to the joint resolution, but I think we also agree with the sponsor and what he's trying to do, and with the House to some degree in what their intent is. Those of us that supported the fuel tax increase were very happy to do so and had worked for a quarter century to get that done. And I can relay a story to you. I don't think it's talking out of school because it was in public, but when the governor signed the transportation bill that included that increase in the motor fuel taxes, he turned around and handed a signed copy of the bill to a public official and said, now don't go out and give yourselves a big raise. Oddly enough, that's one of the very first things that happened with that money. So we understand the frustration. And the question then is, what do you do about it? I liken this bill to throwing the baby out with the bathwater. There was also a lawsuit that was filed by the Missouri Department of Transportation against the state, saying that they did not need legislative approval for their appropriations. And the section that's bracketed out on page 2, lines 13 and 14, stands appropriated without further action, is the clause that they will hang their hat on with that legal challenge. So I would suggest to you, if it does move forward, that you consider leaving only that bracketed amount, the bracketed words in that joint resolution, and remove the rest of the language. While the rest of the language seems to be the same type of intent, then we could get to the problem that you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, where you have political decisions being made on projects. Right now, our current system of having those projects determined at the local level and fed back up through the state transportation improvement plan does make a lot of sense, and make sure that we get those projects done that need to be done does not make it a political decision. I think you could reset the clock by just leaving those brackets in place around the stands appropriated without further action, without the rest of the language, because that's essentially the way we have been operating until this year. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there any questions for the witness? Seeing none, next witness to testify in opposition. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to clarify a point that was just made, and I think this is an important one. The notion that MoDOT granted a raise in October of 2021 is not true. The department, through the commission's authorization, submitted a budget request to the General Assembly for that raise. It was not approved. And I think that's a pretty substantial piece that seems to be carried on and forwarded in the press as well. It was a budget request. We followed the process, and that process didn't seek approval. We were losing about 90 people a month. We did go forward at the urging of the House Budget Committee, and we utilized vacancies that existed in the department. We removed those, used that funding to grant a partial market increase in July of 2022. But that was not anything that wasn't approved in the budget. We didn't exceed any budget categories at all. So I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you for that consideration, sir.
Thank you. Are there any other witnesses testifying in opposition?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, staff. Tom Crawford here on behalf of Missouri Trucking Association, go on record in opposition to this very challenging joint resolution. As a group representing truckers, obviously you know that we're interested in the interstate system and the connectivity of that. And I think the process that MoDOT has put into place over decades has resulted in something that's very positive and inclusive, to the point where multiple times a year they reach out to us to see if we have local truckers that are using intersections, interchanges, things like that, that are on the 5, 10, 15-year out kind of process to get our folks' opinions on what is needed and what kind of things they're seeing, not only for that area, but also as they drive around the country. So the inclusiveness, I think, would still be there in the planning kind of process, but take the ability to do the line item veto and have the one person line item out projects at the top. I think the challenges that the chairman and others have expressed are going to be shown in this, if this would come through.
Thanks, Tom. Any questions for the witness? All right, seeing none, we got enough time for about one more witness. Do we have anybody else besides Randy testifying in opposition? All right.
I will put you.
You're the one we're looking for.
Randy Scher, representing the Missouri Concrete Association. The one thing that stuck with me after the House hearing, and I think Senator Moon, you were getting very, very close to it, that the director laid out on the House side, was in these major long-term projects, the 5 and 10-year projects, that they have to do the planning for, and they have to make sure that money is reserved. They know where it's coming from, laying it out there, and then going out and asking contractors to bid on those projects on a long-term project when you don't know if something like this would pass. when you don't know that that money that is laid out for that project may not be guaranteed because it is subject to appropriation. What is the attitude of the contractors going to be in terms of bidding on some of those longer-term projects, knowing that there's not a guarantee of that money that's coming through? So I'll stop there. Take any questions.
Could not agree with you more. Senator Koenig.
This is a quick question. It might not necessarily apply to you, but maybe someone else can answer it. How do we stack up against other states? How do other states do this? Are there more states that operate the way we operate, or is it more states, is it subject to appropriations and it goes through the political process?
It's about 15 to 35. The states will go through capital planning probably once a decade. Kansas does it once a decade. And several states do it that way. The state I came from did it once a decade, a 10-year plan, separate capital, separately funded, not necessarily through the user fees that come into the system.
Any other questions for the witness? All right, seeing none, thank you. Any other witnesses testifying in opposition? All right. Senator Mayhew, thank you for being here today with your HJR. Is there any other business to come before the committee? Seeing none, we are adjourned.